The freezing December rain was morphing into heavy, wet snow by the time my rideshare pulled up to the curb. It was precisely 6 in the evening, and after 10 brutal months deployed on a highly classified intelligence operation overseas, my boots finally touched the pavement of my own driveway. I was still wearing my crisp dress uniform under a heavy wool trench coat, a massive green duffel bag slung over my shoulder. In my gloved hand, I clutched a plush teddy bear wearing a miniature winter coat, a surprise I had carried through 3 different international airports just to see my 4-year-old daughter smile. I expected her to come bursting through the front door, screaming my name the way she always did whenever I returned from a long training exercise. Instead, when the heavy oak door creaked open, my little girl stood frozen on the threshold in her mismatched holiday pajamas, her tiny frame shivering from the bitter wind. Tears were streaming down her flushed cheeks, and she was sobbing so violently that she could barely catch her breath. Before I could even drop my bags to open my arms, she held up both of her trembling hands and pleaded with me in a terrified whisper to stay outside because she claimed she would get hurt again if I came in. The world seemed to spin on its axis, and for a terrifying second, the cold air refused to enter my lungs. Before I could even comprehend her words, the distant sound of a woman mocking laughter echoed from somewhere deep inside my kitchen. I knelt down on the damp concrete porch, my heart hammering against my ribs as I tried to look into my daughter's eyes. I told her to look at me and asked what was wrong, but her gaze remained fixed on the floorboards. That was when I noticed a violent, yellowing bruise shaped like a tight grip circling her delicate left wrist. As I gently reached out, the front door was suddenly yanked wide open by my younger half-sister, Chloe, who was holding a glass of expensive white wine. She was wearing my favorite cream-colored cashmere sweater, a priceless heirloom passed down by my late mother, and she smiled at me with an eerie, rehearsed warmth. Before I could demand an explanation, my husband of nearly a decade, Thomas, stepped into the hallway holding a glass of bourbon. He did not look like a grateful spouse seeing his wife alive after a dangerous deployment. He looked at me with deep annoyance, like an uninvited stranger who had ruined his evening plans. Thomas aggressively pointed his smartphone camera directly at my face, instantly recording my reaction while Chloe stepped closer, deliberately bumping her shoulder against mine. She sneered that our daughter had been completely unstable ever since I chose to abandon the family for my military career. Every tactical instinct I possessed told me this was an ambush designed to make me snap. I forced my breathing to slow, covertly reached into my pocket to activate an audio recorder on my government phone, and calmly asked my daughter who had given her that bruise. Before she could answer, Thomas grabbed her arm and ordered her upstairs, claiming her real family needed to talk. Brushing past them into the living room, I declared that my name was still on the mortgage, and they had no right to bar me from my home. The house smelled intensely of cinnamon candles and roasted pine, but the familiar warmth was completely gone. I looked up at the mantel and realized every single photograph of my life had been systematically erased. The beautiful portrait of Thomas and me celebrating my promotion was gone, replaced by a professionally shot holiday photo featuring Thomas, Chloe, and my daughter all wearing matching sweaters. Chloe had her hand planted firmly on my daughter's shoulder, like she was the rightful matriarch of the household. Turning toward the hallway, I noticed the electronic keypad on my private home office door was blinking with a solid red error light. When I demanded to know why my security code had been wiped, Thomas chuckled darkly and slid a thick manila folder across the dining table toward me. Inside were legal documents for a formal separation and an emergency custody petition demanding full ownership of the house and supervised visits for me. Chloe sipped her wine and casually advised me to sign the paperwork quietly to avoid making things ugly, while Thomas kept his camera raised, desperately waiting for me to violently lose my temper. Instead of screaming, I calmly dialed emergency services and reported that my child was showing clear signs of physical abuse. Thomas did not even flinch. He simply smirked and whispered that I should have called earlier because he had already spoken to the authorities hours ago. Right on cue, brilliant red and blue police lights began reflecting through the frosted front windows, casting an eerie glow across the decorated space. Thomas leaned in close to my ear, his voice dripping with malice, and challenged me to see who the responding officers would actually believe. Within moments, 2 county deputies were standing in our foyer, and Thomas immediately put on a masterclass in manipulation. He gave them a weary, sorrowful look, explaining that I had just returned from a high-stress deployment and was clearly suffering from a severe psychological breakdown. The officers separated us for questioning, and while I desperately tried to explain the bruising on my daughter's wrist, the lead deputy returned with a file Thomas had handed him. It contained a preemptive harassment report filed by Thomas that morning, alongside a series of fabricated, highly threatening text messages sent from my personal iPad account. To make matters worse, Thomas provided a heavily edited video clip from the previous summer showing me screaming hysterically in our driveway. The footage completely lacked context, failing to show that Thomas had left our toddler locked inside a sweltering SUV in 90-degree heat for nearly 20 minutes while he chatted inside a store. To the deputies, it simply looked like a pattern of unhinged military aggression. When the secondary officer asked my daughter, who had hurt her arm, the poor girl glanced at Thomas's cold stare, immediately shut down, and whispered that she did not remember. Because of the conflicting allegations of domestic hostility and child endangerment, a social worker from Child Protective Services arrived and determined that our daughter could not remain with either parent that night. They placed her in the temporary emergency custody of my retired aunt, and my heart shattered as I watched my little girl walk out into the snow clutching the teddy bear I had brought her. To add to the nightmare, my commanding officer called me an hour later, warning me that my top-secret security clearance was being placed under administrative review until the criminal investigation was fully resolved. The next morning, I found myself sitting in a modest legal office on the edge of town, completely exhausted and staring at a brilliant family attorney named Evelyn Vance. After reviewing the mess of paperwork, Evelyn looked at me with absolute seriousness and stated that our strategy could not be about seeking vengeance against a cheating husband. She emphasized that we had to focus entirely on proving that my daughter was actively unsafe in that environment, promising that the absolute truth would handle the rest. She instructed me to meticulously reconstruct the timeline of my deployment and find anyone who had witnessed the daily reality of my household. I immediately drove to the home of my next-door neighbor, Clara, a fiercely sharp 72-year-old retired school secretary who noticed absolutely everything. The moment she pulled me into her warm kitchen, she handed me a thick, handwritten spiral notebook where she kept detailed logs of every unusual event in the neighborhood. Turning to the August pages, my jaw clenched as I read Clara's precise entries documenting Chloe moving multiple suitcases into my home just weeks after I deployed. Even worse were notes from October detailing my daughter being left outside on the concrete patio, crying in freezing weather, while Chloe ignored her from inside. Clara then opened her tablet and showed me crystal-clear footage captured by her security camera, which was mounted right along our shared fence line. In one video, Chloe could be heard screaming at my daughter, telling her that if her mother actually loved her, she would never have left the country. Clara also revealed that back in late autumn, a moving truck had emptied my home office, loading 6 large boxes into a commercial vehicle. Armed with this new information, Evelyn ran a deep forensic sweep of our finances and discovered that Thomas had used a military power of attorney to illegally drain over $78,000 from my deployment savings. He had transferred the cash into a fraudulent corporate entity called Hale Family Consulting, listing himself as the owner and Chloe as the managing partner. The bank statements showed they had used my hard-earned deployment pay to fund a lavish lifestyle, leasing a luxury vehicle for Chloe, buying designer clothing, and booking a beach vacation. The ultimate insult came when Evelyn found a pamphlet showing that Thomas was scheduled to receive a prestigious Community Leadership Award on Christmas Eve for his extraordinary sacrifice in supporting military families during deployments. He had literally used my stolen combat pay to sponsor the charity event and purchase his own public accolade. During my first supervised visit at my aunt's house, my daughter clung to me tightly, but then she quietly handed me a crayon drawing she had done earlier. It depicted Thomas holding a tiny phone and Chloe with her hand raised, but floating directly above them was a crude black box with a distinct red. When Evelyn and I gently questioned her about the drawing, my daughter began to cry, revealing that Thomas had installed a hidden camera on the living room bookshelf. She whispered that her father had forced her to practice standing by the front door and crying hysterically to ensure the camera caught me looking furious the moment I walked through the door. Evelyn immediately secured an emergency judicial order demanding the preservation of all electronic evidence, but Thomas's legal team instantly claimed the camera had been lost. Refusing to back down, I returned to Clara's house, and her exterior cameras successfully captured footage of Chloe throwing a black trash bag into her vehicle weeks prior. Zooming into the high-definition clip, we captured the exact serial number on a discarded camera box, allowing Evelyn to subpoena the manufacturer for the automated cloud backups. The recovered files contained a horrifying 32-second video of Chloe violently pinching my daughter's arm to make her cry, while Thomas adjusted the lens and calmly stated that once I lost control on camera, they would successfully secure my military pension. On Christmas Eve, I arrived at the Grand Gala Hall wearing my full dress uniform, accompanied by Evelyn, Clara, and 2 undercover child welfare investigators. Thomas was already on stage, delivering a deeply moving, fraudulent speech about the immense sacrifices of military spouses, while a spotlight illuminated me in the crowd. He confidently invited me onto the stage to join him, assuming I would remain silent to avoid a public scene. Instead, I marched up to the podium, took the microphone, and requested that the technical coordinator play a special presentation on the giant projector screen behind us. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence as the hidden camera footage broadcasted Thomas and Chloe orchestrating the abuse and explicitly plotting to steal my retirement fund. Within seconds, a representative from Thomas's bank stepped forward to announce his immediate employment termination for financial fraud, while county detectives marched up the steps with active arrest warrants for child abuse and evidence tampering. Thomas and Chloe immediately turned on each other, screaming bitter recriminations into the live microphones until they were led away in handcuffs. I knelt down on the stage as my little girl broke away from the social worker, running straight into my arms for a tight embrace. The legal battle dragged on for another 9 agonizing months, but the undeniable weight of the evidence eventually secured me sole physical custody of my daughter and a permanent restraining order against Chloe. I ultimately decided to sell the house to give my daughter a fresh start, moving us into a beautiful, quiet townhouse where she could finally sleep through the night without a single shred of fear. My military clearance was fully restored, and I happily accepted a permanent stateside assignment that ensures I will never have to leave her side again. True justice did not taste like sweet revenge. It felt like the profound, quiet relief of watching my daughter laugh freely in a home where she finally feels entirely safe.